Let's start with a revenge story is from Tari. Military revenge, served hot. Back in my army days, I was once in command of a unit of about 80 soldiers in Hawaii. Dialogue sections are the gist of what was said, but it's been a minute so they're not exact. Names changed, etc. TLDR. Soldier wants out of the army. Commander agrees pending good behavior. Soldier fucks around and ends up in the brig before getting kicked out. Most of the soldiers in my command were great people, happy to do their jobs and take home a paycheck. Hard workers, creative, adaptable to unusual army conditions, and generally reliable. But there was one who was trouble from the start. Gentle reader, meet Private Wiggles. My first awareness of Wiggles came 2 or 3 days after I'd taken over command of the unit. We're prepping for a month-long training exercise to Thailand, and Platoon Sergeant Maggie tells me Wiggles might not be able to go as she'd just had an outpatient medical procedure. Departure is about a week away, and I have to validate the personnel roster to make sure we've got logistical support for everyone we're bringing. Transportation, food, lodging, etc. So I talk directly with Wiggles and ask if she's okay to travel and participate in the exercise. Wiggles says it's not a problem, she can handle it. We get to Thailand and set up camp on a Thai army base. 2 days in, and the medical section sends a runner to find me. Wiggles is at our medical clinic, tents with cots and surprisingly extensive medical supplies, laid out with extreme abdominal pain. I cruise over to the clinic tent and the physician assistant, PA, on duty, tells me a couple things. Wiggles acknowledged recently having an abortion, the previously mentioned outpatient medical procedure, and the PA's examination and testing shows that Wiggles has the single worst case of pelvic inflammatory disease, PID, he's ever seen. Seriously, this Army PA who has seen all sorts of crazy shit from soldiers was emphatically impressed by how bad it was. Wiggles developed PID from failing to get treatment for sexually transmitted infections for a long time. As in, she's almost glowing from it. No judgment on the abortion, not everyone is ready for kids. And the STI-induced PID can be treated with high-dose antibiotics, which the PA has on hand. Not a problem, we've got this covered. Wiggles is released to Sergeant SGT Deb, her section sergeant, who will make sure Wiggles takes her antibiotics and keep an eye on her for any further issues. SGT Deb finds me and First Sergeant 1SG Bob about a day later and tells me 2 more things about Wiggles. She's refusing to take her antibiotics and she wants to get out of the army. I again talk with Wiggles. Me. So you want out of the army? You know you have a couple years left on your contract, right? Wiggles. I know, but I'm just done being a soldier and I want to be out of the army. Me. Okay, I can make that happen. You don't want to be here, then I don't want you here either. But here's the deal. You got to play by the rules. I can get you out with an honorable discharge and I'll start the paperwork as soon as we're back in Hawaii. But you need to take your antibiotics, do your job, and be where you're supposed to be. You do your part, and I'll do my part for you. Sound good? Wiggles. Yep, I can do that. Spoiler alert, she couldn't do that. For the rest of the Thailand exercise, SGT Deb had to take control of Wiggles' meds and force her to take them, when she could actually find Wiggles, who consistently found someplace else to be. At one point in the next week or so, she accuses 1SG Bob of having sex with her, easily disproven as he doesn't have any STIs, and Wiggles has all of them. She was just trying to stir up trouble with wild accusations, I guess. We get back to Hawaii, and I start the process to get her out of the army because as much as she's been a handful of trouble in Thailand, I'm thinking it's still easier at this point to kick her to the curb than it is to keep her around and punish her before kicking her out. I was wrong. Even as I start to work on her discharge, she ramps up the stupidity. Here are a few examples. Wiggles gets caught drinking, only 19 years old. Wiggles and her husband lie to the on-base housing office and provide forged authorization documents to get into rent-free on-base housing that they didn't qualify for. Side note, Mr. Wiggles was no winner either. He was about to be dishonorably discharged from his infantry unit for selling drugs to other soldiers. Wiggles shows up at the infirmary to get treatment for facial bruising. Mr. Wiggles kicked her in the face, while wearing his combat boots, when Wiggles accused him of cheating on her. Wiggles refuses to show up for work, or any unit formation, and can't be found anywhere for days. Wiggles slashes all 4 tires on Mr. Wiggles' car, then attacks him with the knife when he confronts her. Military police are called, end up taking him in when Wiggles gives a sob story. But he's the one with defensive wounds on his hands, not her. One of my male sergeants uses my open door policy to visit me one day. Tells me he saw Wiggles stripping at one of the skankier gentlemen's clubs down in Honolulu the night before, and she had also convinced one of our other female soldiers to come along with her to do the same. Here's a weird one. I get a call from a temp agency asking me if it's okay for Wiggles to continue working through them as an administrative assistant for clients in town. Not uncommon for soldiers to have a second job. But with everything else she was up to at the time, this one just had me going, WTF? There's more, but you get the idea. At this point, Wiggles's actions are egregious enough that I can no longer just kick her out with an honourable discharge. I put her on notice that she's at risk for a court-martial. I thought that threat might keep her in line, but she just couldn't seem to stop herself from getting stupider and stupider. It's the old 80-20 problem. 80% of your time is spent dealing with the 20% of your folks who are troublemakers. At this point, I'm wasting a not insignificant amount of time dealing with Wiggles's issues almost daily. I had genuinely, and in good faith, offered her the easy path, but I guess she figured she'd try to burn the place down on the way out, since she apparently thought she was getting what she wanted no matter what she did. I was reminded of what my old platoon sergeant used to say when I was coming up through the ranks. You want to get stupid? Go ahead, but I can get stupider. Cue the revenge. She's causing me daily headaches, so I'm going to bring the pain back to her. Honourable discharge paperwork is out the window, and I lean into the special court-martial process instead. My legal counsel tells me that Wiggles's activities are likely to get her a couple weeks confinement at most, maybe not even that. She may get a monetary fine, and she'll probably get an other than honourable OTH discharge, potential for a bad conduct discharge, which are worse. But while her actions have been not that good, they also are not that bad. I'm rational enough to understand that. I have a brief chat with Captain CPT Morgan, Wiggles' military defense attorney, about where I'm going with this case. During our chat, I try to be a gentleman and let him know that Wiggles is going to be trouble for him if he's not careful. He gives me a condescending, "This isn't my first rodeo, Bucka. I'm a big boy and can take care of myself." Fair enough, I tried to warn you. Normally, a soldier getting a special court-martial for piddle shit might get confined to the barracks, restricted to their on-base quarters, or something similar for the duration of the process. It's not like she killed someone, right? However, my military legal counsel drops this little gem in my ear. He tells me Wiggles has met all 5 of the conditions, danger to others, flight risk, etc., required by military law, Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, to warrant requesting confinement prior to her trial. He tells me, if you can remember these 5 conditions and elaborate on the details at our next pre-trial meeting with the military magistrate, you might be able to get her confined to the Navy Brig at Fort Island until the trial. I'm a guy who likes to pay attention to sound legal advice, so I do, just as he says. A couple days later, we go in for the pre-trial meeting and I run down the list for the magistrate. Boom. Magistrate orders Wiggles to be confined in the brig through the trial. 1 SG Bob and Platoon Sergeant Maggie go to pick her up from her on base housing. She won't open the door, but they know she's inside because they can clearly hear her and Mr. Wiggles banging away. This is important for later. The Wiggles finish up, she takes her time getting showered and dressed, and finally comes to the door when it pleases her. Off she goes to the brig. The pre-trial processes take up the next 4 weeks. During that time, I have to deal with CPT Morgan, the paralegals in his office, and various fun things to do with her pending court-martial. Other than that, it's blissfully peaceful. Wiggles chills in the brig for 4 weeks. Seriously chills. Every time I had to visit, it was freezing in there. I required to make weekly welfare visits to see if she's being mistreated, if she has any needs that aren't being met, etc. Seems weird, but as her commander, I'm still responsible to make sure the Brig staff aren't mistreating my soldier. Other goings-on in this time period. Mr. Wiggles fraudulently applies for a car loan and gets a van in their names. Mr. Wiggles is dishonorably discharged and kicked off the island. Flies home to wherever the hell he originally enlisted from. CPT Morgan asks me to consider an OTH discharge and time served in lieu of taking things all the way to trial. I'm hot to get that pound of flesh from her, but my legal counsel advises me to avoid the court-martial and just kick out Wiggles with the OTH discharge. After all, he says, she's already been locked up for almost 3 weeks, so the magistrate will probably just give her time served and the OTH anyway. See my earlier comment about sound legal advice. My boss, Lieutenant Colonel, LTC, Ryan, thinks I'm too invested in the case, that I'm no longer objective. LTC Ryan insists on coming with me to the Brig for the next welfare visit. This is 3 weeks into Wiggles's stay in those luxurious accommodations. Among other bullshit lines she throws at us, Wiggles tells us she needs to see the dentist about a filling that's giving her trouble, and Motrin just isn't working. At the end of the visit, LTC Ryan tells the guards about Wiggles's filling, asks if they can give her anything stronger than Motrin, then instructs them to follow up with the dentist. Guard actually laughs out loud at this and says, "No, sir, Motrin is the best we can do in the Brig." And that other thing? For the last 2 weeks, she's been telling anyone with ears that she wants to try getting her wisdom teeth pulled before she's kicked out. She doesn't have a problem with any fillings. It was hilarious to watch LTC Ryan's face go from obvious concern for Wiggles' well-being to outright fury, and the next words out of his mouth were, "That bitch lied to me." I make arrangements with CPT Morgan to accept his request for time served and oath in lieu of court-martial. Sometime later that week, I get a call from the Brig. Wiggles is pregnant. Remember the scene at her house 4 weeks prior? And they can't keep her confined anymore because of it. She has to be released back to her unit until the court-martial, or other actions, are complete. CPT Morgan stakes his reputation on Wiggles being a good girl until we can send her back home to Carolina. He'll come to regret that, and he can't say, "I didn't warn him." We get Wiggles back from her 4-week all-inclusive stay in the Brig. I've accepted Captain Morgan's request to avoid the court-martial, and I confine Wiggles to the barracks under supervision for the 9 days she has left until her flight to Carolina. Immediately, we have another shit show. Wiggles is smoking in the barracks. Not a big deal that she's smoking, it's just not allowed inside barracks rooms. Wiggles is caught with a bottle of hypnotic liquor in her barracks room. She's still only 19. Wiggles slips out of the barracks and runs off for a day when her platoon sergeant gets distracted from supervising her. 1SG Bob and Lieutenant LT. Ricky, the executive officer, go to collect Wiggles's belongings from her on base housing so we can box it up and ship it to her home. And they find that Mr. Wiggles has left behind a bunch of stuff he stole from other soldiers, body armor, military equipment, and some ammunition, smoke grenades, and explosives that he stole during trips to the range. All lined up right inside the front door where it's impossible to miss. They call me, asking what to do. Me. Just collect it all. Return the equipment to the central issue facility and dump the ammo and explosives in the nearest amnesty box. Mr. Wiggles obviously meant for Wiggles to take the fall for having it. Husband of the year. If we take that bait, Wiggles will be here forever. I don't want that. Do you? LT Ricky. Nope, I don't want that either. It'll be like it never happened. In light of all this drama, I bring Wiggles into my office to remind her of her agreement to be a good girl till she leaves the island, with LT Ricky as a witness in the office to protect my ass. Me? Wiggles, you're in violation of your release agreement from the Brig. You've been sneaking out of the barracks, you've been smoking and drinking. Wiggles, she cuts me off. Yeah, and doing all kind of drugs too. Heavy sarcasm voice. Me. Be that as it may, I'm giving you fair warning that you're at risk of losing the deal I made with CPT Morgan. You're pregnant again. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but most damage to a fetus from alcohol come in the first few weeks after conception. I don't know if you're planning to keep this one or not, but at the rate you're going, this baby's going to be born dumber than you. Wiggles, gaping like a damn fish. Wiggles then bolts from my office and runs down to LTC Ryan's office at the other end of the building to squeal on me for insulting her, LT Ricky hot on her heels. She tries to rush into LTC Ryan's office, but LT Ricky gets in first and fills him in. LT Ricky tells me later how it went down. Wiggles is yelling about how I called her stupid. Strangely vanilla thing to focus on considering everything she's done, but you do you. And that she's being mistreated. LTC Ryan yells at his admin to get CPT Morgan on the phone, now. He reams CPT Morgan for his client's jackassery, tells him to fucking fix this, and makes various threats to CPT Morgan's career. About a half hour later, I get a call from CPT Morgan. CPT Morgan. Bucka, bucka, bucka. Yes, he did that whole patronizing bullshit. I can't believe the words I'm hearing from Wiggles. I'm shocked, just shocked, that you would use language like that and call her names. Side note, my mom is an attorney, and I grew up with tales from the courthouse about lawyers using exactly this sort of hyperbole. Your Honor, I'm shocked, appalled, and dismayed that opposing counsel would attempt to paint my client in such a light. It's the kind of bullshit they said when they didn't have a good argument. So as soon as I hear the word shocked, I know I own him and immediately cut in. Me? And I bet you're appalled and dismayed too. CPT Morgan, stumbling and sounding slightly confused. Well, yes, of course I am. You can't talk to soldiers like that. I know of a lieutenant colonel, a commander, who called one of her soldiers stupid, and she's no longer in command now. Me? I didn't call her stupid. I informed her of basic biological facts. Not my problem if she takes the news poorly, and arguably, she's not all that smart. Anyway, you called me, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't to warn me about what I said to Wiggles, so what do you want? CPT Morgan. What will it take to prevent you from kicking back our deal? Apparently, LTC Ryan had cinched his asshole up good and tight. Me. You could get her on a plane tomorrow. CPT Morgan. How about if I get her out of here by Friday? It was Wednesday, and she was due to fly out the following Wednesday. Me. I don't think you can manage that, but good on you if you do. To his credit, CPT Morgan gets Wiggles a flight for Sunday, 3 days early. I print up official orders appointing LT Ricky as a military escort specifically for her. LT Ricky drives her to the airport, and the airline desk agent calls me to verify his status when they get to the check-in counter. They give him a special pass to get through security with her. He stays with her at the gate to make sure she gets on, and stays on the plane, then stays at the gate until the plane is in the air. Some boogers are hard to flick. We wanted to make damn sure this one landed someplace else. About a month later, I get a call from the military police about a derelict van in the parking lot with all 4 tires slashed. Guess who that belonged to? It's really kind of sad when I look back on it. I had 2 other soldiers come to me at different points asking to get out of the army ahead of their contracts. One just didn't want to be in the army anymore. The other did want to stay in the army but had family issues that would be a lot easier to deal with as a civilian. They played by the rules, and I got both of them out with honorable discharges and all the benefits. They even qualified for unemployment. Too easy. Wiggles could have had the same treatment. I told her exactly what I could do for her, then had to shift gears and told her exactly what I was going to do to her. Then I did it. I could have been her best friend on her way out the door, but instead, I ended up owning her and her dumbass defense attorney. She screwed herself out of transition benefits and access to the VA, and picked up a lifelong black mark for employment. All because she couldn't play nice for a few weeks. She decided she wanted to play fuck around games. And we all know what happens next. The revenge is a masterclass in patience and strategy. The commander, OP, offered private wiggles an easy exit, but when she repeatedly acted out, he turned the tables. By leveraging military protocols, he had her confined to the brig and ensured she left with a damaging other than honourable discharge. The punishment fit the offence perfectly, making this a satisfying tale of karma for a soldier who couldn't follow the rules. Always remember, military is all about discipline, war, and battles are the second things. The next story is Forum Reddit admin DumbB87. How I screwed over a racist, horrible, bigoted business owner and likely resulted in him going out of business faster. This occurred in a southern state. I won't mention the state because, well, you'll see. I was an account manager for a digital marketing company. We sold lead generation services to business owners to generate leads. One of our key selling features was, if you turned on call tracking numbers, plus recorded phone calls, we'd guarantee you X amount of leads based upon Y spend. And if we failed to meet that, you'd be entitled to partial, or if we really failed, potentially full refund. Some things to know about advertising. CTN, call tracking number. It's a unique number that's assigned to a certain point of advertising that consumers call. This number is only on that piece of advertising. It routes to the business line, and unless the consumer is very observant, they have no idea they are using a CTN. Call recording. If you turn on CTNs, we can record the calls and store the audio on our servers. The business has to consent to this. Also, when you call, you'll hear a message, "This call is recorded for quality assurance" type message. Both those are required to be eligible for our service guarantee. Story time. Part 1. The lay of the land. The business in question was a small dad and son contracting company with a couple employees. They primarily focused on smaller jobs such as windows, drainage, finishing, etc. Unfortunately, this business owner was a royal Peter. He went back years and his account was filled with nothing but complaints. Also, there was a strong suspicion that he was racist because his last account manager was black. The business owner, who we will name Scott, refused to ever meet in person with the previous manager. Also, I was white. He had no issues finding the time to sit down with me and tell me how shit our service is. Well, it's coming up to do contract renewal, and he says we aren't producing his leads, and he wants to put in a claim for failing to meet our service guarantee. I spoke to my manager about this, and he said he wants me to listen to his calls, write a detailed report, and present my findings to the manager. The manager is worried this may end up in court due to the dollar amounts involved. Nearly a whole working week of hours. I probably spent damn near 40 hours on this, and I wrote a detailed 24-page report outlining the results of our advertising. To say I shred this business owner business practices is an understatement. The report was a straight-up attack on his poor customer service skills, disorganization, inability to execute, and complete and total failure of anything resembling any sense of standard business practices that just make logical sense. I will share with you a few examples of the types of calls I listen to. Small calls where multiple phone calls are truly epic in their total incompetence. Customer 1. I was a small-time landlord who had 3 different properties that had received a quote from Scott for work. The landlord had accepted Scott's quote and agreed to do business. In one voicemail message, offered to pay a deposit to start work. Throughout 4 voicemail messages, this poor landlord went from, "Hey, I want to pay you," to "Are you okay?" to "Why the fuck aren't you returning my calls?" Yes, I said voicemails. Scott had gone out to this man's properties, quoted his pricing, and then straight up refused to do anything more. Why? I legit got no idea. I called the customer in question and said I was the quality assurance agency and was doing a survey on Scott's performance. The guy ended up paying Scott's competitor about 15% more to do the work and was utterly beside himself on why Scott ignored him. I was also confused. FYI, all my calls were recorded and put into the company records. Customer 2. This one in particular really pissed me off. Again, the public housing office called Scott to get a quote on work that involved 25 different homes. Scott was kind enough to answer the phone this time, which, ironically, was one of the few fucking times he ever answered the phone. Initially, Scott sounded happy to get such a big, profitable job. Then Scott learned two things. It was Section 8 housing. It was a neighborhood that was Black Hispanic. Immediately upon learning this, Scott informed the housing office that, unfortunately, he's superbooked, not true, and that this area is actually out of his service area, not true. The housing office was confused and was like, "So you're not interested in bidding?" And Scott said, "No, I'm not," and hung up. He didn't even say goodbye. So I did a quality assurance call to the housing office, and the lady was completely confused why Scott wasn't even remotely interested in the job. Luckily for Scott, the lady didn't connect that Scott was a racist cunt, cause discrimination against a protected class is a crime. Customer 3. It was an overseas phone number from Japan. A service member stayed up late to call Scott during his business hours. This person told Scott he was deployed overseas. Still, over the weekend, someone broke into his home back in the States, where Scott operated out. He was trying to arrange for a new door. He mentioned this was an emergency as his wife was being forced to stay at a hotel. Scott never returned his calls, nor made any effort to contact him on the email he provided, nor called the wife, who was local. It was a super easy job that Scott could have done in about an hour or so, and made a solid profit. I think that's enough examples. Part 2, review and plan. The actual report at the end said, out of the X phone calls, Scott failed to properly service the leads in about 70% of the cases, and that I could keep on going on. Still, I felt a clear trend had been established. It wasn't that our service wasn't producing leads for Scott. It was that Scott was a racist, bigoted cunt who everyone fucking hated. Obviously, I said that in more professional language. When I presented the report to my manager, he looked at it and went, "Damn, 24 pages. I asked if it was fine, and he smiled and said, "I got a pretty good idea of what this is going to say." He said he'd review it and get back to me. So a day later, he came to me and said he'd gone over the report. The VP had gone over the report, and he asked what I thought the recommended course of action should be. My recommendation? Remove all discounts, charge Scott total price for our services, and clearly explain our job is to provide him with leads. It's his job to sell those leads. If he can't convert our leads into business, that's not our problem. Scott was getting a 70% discount. Our price was built with discounts in mind. My manager was like, "He'll probably cancel." And I asked my manager, "And is that a problem?" If Scott was going remain my client, he was going pay dearly for that privilege. If he wasn't willing to pay, I was happy to let him walk. My manager smiled and said, "Nope." Part 3, the meeting. My manager and I called Scott and arranged a meeting. I created a PowerPoint summarizing my findings. About a 1/3 of the way, Scott gives in and tells me to get to the point. I knew this was going to be a heated meeting, so I wanted my manager present both as support and a witness. So I explained that it's our job to bring him leads. It's his job to sell them. His failure to do that is not our problem. He gets irritable and pissy, and my manager backs me up. He goes, "Fine, I'll renew my contract at the same rate." To which I go, "Yep, you see, you didn't let me get to that part. We have new pricing for you." Scott goes, "Lower?" I go, "Oh no, not lower." My manager smirked. Scott asked me for the new rate. I hit him at the full rate, which was 3x what he was paying. Scott is furious with me, says I'm overcharging him, says I'm ripping him off, says I'm a horrible salesperson. He tells my manager I should be fired for treating him like this. My manager looks at me, and I had been waiting for the moment. Truth be told, I gave zero fucks what Scott thought of me. If anything, my goal was to get him to cancel. "Scott, you're a challenging client. Therefore, the pricing of our service needs to reflect the challenge of providing you service. So we will be charging you our full rate. If you like, I'd be happy to go over why this ROI still makes sense based upon our past performance." This was wording I had gone over with my management before using it, My manager felt it was fine. It felt so amazing, so say those words. It was the nicest way I could say, "You're a cunt. If I'm going work with you, it's got to be worth my while." Scott says we are a bunch of greedy fucking pricks. He says, "I'm going cancel," to which I said, "That is an outcome we have decided is acceptable if that's what you choose to do." Scott huffs and goes, "And what about my refund?" Dismayed, I go, "Scott, we've clearly demonstrated we did our part. The reason why you aren't bringing in sales is because of your company inability to close on the leads we generate." To which Scott goes, "So you're saying I don't know what I'm doing?" To which I say, "Scott, if you agree to sign at the new rate, I'd be happy to sit down with you and help you free of charge on how to improve your sales techniques and close more your leads." This is me telling him he doesn't know how to run his business and was very much meant as an insult. Scott goes, "Nah, fuck you, I'm calling my lawyer." I go, "So I take you're not going renew?" He goes, "Fuck no." My manager goes, "That's fine. Would you like us to email you our report on your leads?" Scott goes, "Sure, I'll show my lawyer." FYI, we never heard from Scott's lawyer. We wish Scott a good day and he leaves. Later, we wrote him an email, attached the report, and also told him if his lawyer would like the recording in question, we can send that file over as well. Our bases were covered, and we knew it. I suspect he also came to the same realization, but he had too much pride to admit that. Part 4. Make sure that dagger is nice and deep. A few weeks go by. My manager says we got to shut down his account, so I need to call him and ask him what he wants to do with his CTN numbers, which we control. In our contract, we say at the end of the agreement, the customer has the right to have the numbers ported over for a fee. It would have been normal to waive the fee as a gesture of goodwill, but Scott desired zero goodwill, and he received what he desired. I tell my manager there's no way I'm porting the numbers for free, and just like his quote, I'm charging him full rate $15 a number. The total came out to just a bit over $100. So I call Scott, I get his voicemail, but he doesn't answer. I write him a registered letter, and in that letter I outlined he has 30 days to respond. We have his CTNs, and if he's willing to pay a $15 per number port fee, we will transfer those numbers over to his phone provider. One morning, I woke up to about a dozen hateful text messages in which Scott told me to go fucking burn in hell. I took that to mean that Scott was not interested in porting over his numbers, and I reviewed those texts with my manager. We saved those messages and uploaded it to his account. So, is that all? Of course not. Part 5. But wait, there's more. So here I was with 7 CTN numbers that had been in service for literally years. Those 7 numbers were saved in Scott customers' phones. And to many of Scott's customers, those numbers were Scott's number. Obviously, they wouldn't be advertised to anyone, but that doesn't mean they won't produce phone calls. Now, if I just let the numbers die, the customers will call and simply be told this number is no longer in service. Now, I'm not entirely sure if what I did was legal, but it's been quite a few years, so I feel comfortable about introducing you to Bobby. Bobby was another southern boy, but as much of an asshole that Scott was, Bobby was a sweetheart. His mama would make me pies for our meetings. He was a complete joy to work with. Bobby also owned a similar business to Scotty, but Bobby's business was more advanced, did more types of jobs, and also serviced the same area. So I submitted a service request to port all of Scott's 7 CTNs to Bobby account, and I waived the fee. So all of a sudden hundreds of Scott's customers would think they were calling Scott, but they'd get Bobby. Bobby had all his call routed to his secretary Ashley, who was an angel. Ashley was also a wickedly talented saleswoman, and I know for a fact she'd be able to take Scott's clients and convert them for Bobby. So that's what I did. I had those 7 CTNs ported over to Bobby. This did a few things that benefited nearly everyone involved. Bobby got more business. I produced more leads for Bobby, which means Bobby was comfortable with spending more money with me, which meant I made more money. Scott old customers got better service. Part 6. Capitalize on my revenge. At the next performance meeting with Bobby, Bobby was very pleased with the sudden uptick in new customers. He even asked me, "What did you do to my account?" I smiled and said, "I reviewed your account and made a few tweaks. Have you seen any improvement?" He absolutely did. He asked me, "Did this cost me anything extra?" I go, "Nope." He ended up increasing his spend with us by about 40% on additional services. I Googled Scott Business about a year later. He wasn't in business anymore. Wonder why? No, my company never caught on to me porting over the numbers. I strongly suspect our legal department would not have been pleased. TL. Doctor proved to my client I was providing value, declined his compensation, jacked his prices up, and sent his customers to his competitor, and he went out of business. Wow, the revenge was masterclass against a racist and incompetent business owner. It was really satisfying to see the incompetent client getting superior services and he losing his business. The story for this video is from Don't Be Mean, or I'll Sue. Narcissist boss and complicit company get what they deserve. A bit of background. A few years ago, I quit my career in the tech industry. This was after the company I was working for went public and everything went downhill. I was sick of making money for the rich and needed some time to really live life. I proceeded to spend a few months traveling, working on home projects, and really doing whatever the hell I wanted. One day, about 4 months into my freedom, I was having lunch with my best friend, and she told me, "You need to stop being lazy and get a job." She had recently been hired at a company in the construction industry and mentioned there was an opening. The opening was doing something I had zero experience in, but a change of career was appealing. I applied and promptly was given a phone interview. I spent a little time researching everything about this position, and after many interviews, managed to fake my way in. Turns out this position was wildly different from anything I had done before. It taxed me in ways I had never experienced. Not only was my job stressful, my boss turned into a nightmare. He had worked there since the company was founded. He was a part of the good old boys club. Now, for everyone that doesn't know, the construction industry has virtually zero HR. This was close to $1 billion company and was still the same way. My boss was a narcissist, sexist, liar, and downright jerk. Weirdly, most of that was directed towards others, and not me. My best friend was one person that took the brunt of it. It killed me to hear what he would say to her. All of this took its toll on me. New Year's Day. About 3 months into my employment, January 1st hit. I wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning with pain in my chest and my head racing a million miles an hour. Luckily, my roommate was a paramedic and happened to be home. I rush over to her room and yell that I think I'm having a heart attack. She comes out, takes my vitals, asks some questions, and determines I am most likely having a panic attack. Sure enough, I calm down and manage to not die. I had never had a panic attack up until then. Throughout the following week, I continue to have flare-ups of chest pain and heart palpitations. I figure something could really be wrong, so I go to my doctor. He does a few tests and determines it's most likely some acid reflux. He prescribes some meds, and the following week is better. Then, one night, when heading home from dinner with my sister, boom, I get rear-ended at a stoplight by a drunk driver. No skid marks. Didn't even attempt to stop. I felt a bit of tightness in my back, so decide to go get checked out at the hospital to be safe. I get there and they take my vitals. My blood pressure was on the moon, like 180 to 100. They take it about an hour later and it's still high. They recommend I go see my doctor again. The next couple weeks waiting for my doctor appointment is hell. I am having daily panic attacks, chest pain, trouble breathing, massive fatigue. The whole gambit. Finally get to the day of my appointment. Let my doctor know what's going on, and he determines I should go see a few different specialists and get all kinds of tests done to be safe. Throughout the next couple months, and have everything poked and prodded. Because of the amount of tests that needed to be done, I missed a good bit of work. This turned my boss on me. He constantly complained about me being gone. All the while, not an ounce of work was dropped. With my tech background, I also took it upon myself to start making reports and collecting data that I would present to him on ways of improving the department and company. I later found out he would take these reports, which at times could save the company hundreds of thousands to potentially millions of dollars, and present them as his own to the owner. This made me furious and didn't help with my physical issues. However, slowly I made it through all of the prescribed tests and they couldn't find anything physically wrong with me. Turns out, all of the issues were caused by stress and anxiety, something I had never had an issue with before. My doctor referred me to an amazing counselor that helped me learn how to manage the problems I was facing and get back to a reasonable state of mind. Although this never got to an acceptable level because of my boss. I started to email HR with my issues with him and things I have witnessed with others. Most of this was met with unwillingness to help in any way. Q. The turning point. A dear co-worker whom everyone loved and respected decided to quit out of nowhere. She too worked under my boss. In her exit interview, she gave the sole reason for quitting as my boss. She finally hit her breaking point, and enough was enough. However, because she was so well liked, this prompted some questions from the owner and other senior management. They wanted to know why my boss was the reason for her leaving. They had HR set up a meeting with us in the department and our boss to go over our issues with him. We all were excited to finally, hopefully, get the people that matter to listen. We have the meeting and we all lay out the issues with our boss and give a multitude of examples. I went a bit overboard and had an entire presentation. Turns out this was all a charade to cover my boss's ass. He was prescribed some management counselling, which I'm pretty sure he never did, and things continued on the merry way. However, now, with the knowledge my boss had of our issues with him, he turned the volume up to 11. The constant berating, yelling, write-ups came flowing out. It got bad enough that I started to secretly record every meeting with him. I saved every single email and documented every interaction with him. I continued to push for help from HR, but again, his status in the company kept him immune from any response. Thankfully, throughout all of this, I managed to keep my mental health in check thanks to my counselor's tools. I, once again, get sick. Yes, I get sick, but this time it's with a real cold and lasts a few days, all of which covered by government-mandated sick time. I come back to work and not even a week goes by and I get called into my boss's office with other senior management. I knew this wasn't good. My boss lets me know that they are firing me for attendance. I am gobsmacked. I have never been fired in my life, and I know I was an asset to the company's success. I didn't slack off. I didn't miss deadlines. The attendance excuse appeared to just be what my boss thought would be easiest to get rid of me with. Now, I live in an at-will state. You can be fired for basically any reason except for a bad one. They presented me with a meager 2-week pay severance. I declined signing it, packed my stuff up, and left. I knew the whole situation didn't feel right, especially because I was familiar with the recent state laws that passed about sick time and an employer not being legally allowed to fire you for using it. Because of this, I went to my mom, who has been in the law field her entire life, and got a referral for an employment law attorney. Things start to look up. The day of my appointment with the employment law attorney couldn't come quick enough. I had gathered everything I had collected from my time at the company and presented it to him. The recordings on my phone, the emails, the documented interactions, everything. After showing the attorney, he pushes back from his desk and says, "Holy shit, you have a hell of a case here. They messed up bad." A wave of relief flows over my entire body. Me thinking the only blatant violation was firing me for using sick time, I was taken aback when he proceeded to explain that the company made 4 huge violations. The sick time violation not even being anywhere near the top of the list. Some big things I learned from him. The meeting I had with my boss, HR, and the rest of the department where we went over all of our issues with him was a key piece of evidence for one of their biggest violations. I learned this type of meeting is considered protected concerted activity and covered under the National Labour Relations Act. The Act protects against retaliation for having this kind of meeting. According to my lawyer, all of my boss's activities following that meeting can be considered Retaliation. When it comes to health issues and how they affect you at your workplace, make sure you document every interaction with your employer. It's important to show that you made an effort to let them know of your complications and how they may affect you at your workplace. I sent countless emails to HR, letting them know of my mental health issues, and their failure to make accommodations was a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Having recordings and documentation on how your employer interacts differently with females and males is important to prove a violation of the Civil Rights Act. After all of this, the lawyer stated I had 3 options. Option 1, I could retain him and we could file a lawsuit. He explained that would be expensive and take a lot of time. However, would most likely result in a good amount of money. Option 2, I could file claims with all of the departments that cover the violated acts. He explained that some of these departments can take years to investigate and process the claims. However, for some of them, especially the violation of the National Labor and Relations Act, the investigation can be absolute hell on the employer. This would probably be the biggest FU to the employer. Option 3, I go back by myself and renegotiate the severance. This being the quickest and easiest option. This option sounded very appealing. I really didn't want to drag this out for multiple years. I told the lawyer that option 3 is most likely my choice, and he mentioned that I should probably start negotiations at 9 months of severance and full benefits. After consulting with people close to me, I decided to go with option 3. I met with HR and senior management, explained that I consulted with an employment law attorney, stated all of the acts that he feels they violated, and asked for 9 months of severance. After a couple weeks negotiating with their attorney, we settled on 6 months of severance with full benefits. It's been a few years since this has happened, and it still makes me feel overwhelmingly happy thinking about it. In the end, I found an absolutely amazing job in the same industry. My ex-boss ended up being moved to a position that wasn't in management, and hopefully, nobody will ever have to go through what I and others went through at that company again. TLDR. Boss is the devil. Miss work because of mental health issues. Boss continues to be a douche lord. Start to document every interaction with boss. Get fired. Consult lawyer. Make the company pay me 6 months of severance with benefits, and my boss is no longer in management. The revenge was strategic and deeply satisfying, a smart and calculated move that delivered justice in the most exemplary way possible. OP meticulously documenting every injustice and building an ironclad case and getting the toxic boss kicked out of management was really cool. Perfect revenge, really. The next story is from Reaper0221. It is a really bad idea to make a government employee angry. This one is a double government employee event, and what you should know is if you get the attention of a government employee and make them angry, they will make your life a living hell. Sorry, this is a long one. The setup is that I was working for a local county government in the permitting department that handled drainage and floodplain enforcement. I received a complaint from a homeowner, nice guy, lived next door to a house that was part of an incorporated village. Not nice guy. Nice guy lived in an unincorporated portion of the county, and hence the call to me as an agent of the county. I drove out to the site and to investigate and discovered some interesting facts. The permitting agent for the village allowed the incorporated homeowner to fill his lot affecting the drainage, which caused the unincorporated lot to flood every time there was anything more than light rain. Nice guy indicated that there was some tension between him and not nice guy, and part of the issue was that nice guy and his partner were a gay couple. This ran up a red flag for me, but in trying to be impartial, I took the information and some photos for the file and indicated that I would contact the village to find a resolution. I wrote a letter and then called the village inspector, Jackwagon, to discuss. I was told by Jackwagon that the village could do as it pleased, and that I could do nothing to stop not nice guy from doing as they pleased, as it was approved by the village. There was then a comment about those type of people, the gay couple, making complaints just to cause trouble. I was now on the case, and it was time to make sure everything done on the incorporated lot was 100% legal. At this point, the game certainly was now on because if there is one thing that grinds my gears, it is bullying. I went back out and spoke to Nice Guy to let them know what I was up to, and also that I was not going to let this slide. I then started investigating the elevations on the two lots and what fill had been placed on the incorporated lot. The not nice guy came out and started getting belligerent about my presence and ongoing investigation. He incorrectly stated that I did not have jurisdiction over his lot and that he would be calling the police. I patiently listened and then pulled out my two-way radio and requested that the home base dispatch both a village and a county police unit to the location. I then indicated that since there was a regulatory floodplain on his lot, I did in fact have jurisdiction and that I would be exercising my right to determine the impact of his fill activities upon that floodplain. Both of the police units showed up and I let them know what was going on. They were both appropriately agitated to have to waste their time and let not nice guy know that I was within, in my authority, to proceed with the investigation. A little while later, while I was measuring things, Jack Wagon showed up. He stated berating me about harassing the village resident and threatening calling my boss and filing a complaint and so forth. I invited him to do so, quoting which parts of the code he should indicate I was violating. I was using marking paint to show the limits of the floodplain for the photos for the file. And what do you know, Jack Wagon's shoe got painted when he tried to stop me? Obviously, he was even more angry, as was the homeowner, due to very bright orange paint in the grass in his yard. I pointed out I had done the same on the neighbouring lots, but they just kept complaining. It was actually marking chalk that comes off pretty easily. Interestingly, I found two really wrong things on Not Nice Guy's lot. 1, there was fill placed in the floodplain, and 2, a garden shed was built on the fill and partially within the floodplain. Both are a big no-no and are actually against federal law. So the course of action had 2 parts. 1, make the incorporated homeowner remove the fill and shed from the floodplain, and 2, let Nice Guy place fill in their lot outside of the floodplain to counteract the fill remaining in Not Nice Guy's lot outside of the floodplain. I also told Nice Guy it would be a good idea to run a field tile on their side to drain the water that would inevitably pond up between the two lots when it rained. Predictably, Not Nice Guy and Jack Wagon got super angry when I sent the letter out that there were violations that either had to be corrected, remove fill and shed, or apply for a revision of the floodplain with the Army Corps of Engineers. Good luck with that. This then led to a meeting at the county office with Not Nice Guy, Jack Wagon, my supervisor, and myself. Quickly, things went to 11, and there was yelling by Jack Wagon about abuse of power, etc. The department head came into the conference room and told them both they were wrong and that they should leave peacefully and comply or face the consequences, fines. The best part was that Not Nice Guy had to apply for a permit, and guess who was the one to review and approve it? That's right, yours truly. Now, I was following the letter of the law, but you have to know that poor government workers are underpaid and overworked. Strangely, the permit for Nice Guy was almost immediately approved, while Not Nice Guy had to have a very thorough review to ensure it was correct. You could make a case I was abusing my power, but I can assure you that the timing for their review was well within acceptable limits. Also, how could I be held to account that they misfiled 3 times before they finally got it right? Generally, if you behaved like a civil human and came to the office, we would help you get things done properly so the permit would go through first time, but Not Nice Guy decided he could do it all in his own, so it took him 3 tries. Had he come to the office, I would have given him the same service as others, but he decided to take the hard route, and therefore I didn't give a single inch when it came to the submission being perfectly correct. Ultimately, the situation was resolved, but it took a lot more effort than it should have. Moral of the story: don't be an entitled homophobic asshole. The revenge was served through meticulous adherence to legal procedures, ensuring that the entitled homophobic neighbour faced consequences for violating floodplain regulations. OP, the county employee, exposed the illegal fill and construction, forcing the homeowner to correct his actions. It's a satisfying tale of bureaucratic karma. A very interesting pro-revenge story from Also Not the Mama. HOA president is a bully. Well, his ego allows me to bully him. A lot of people suggested I cross-post this here. So this story is about a property I own, but rent out. This may sound strange, but I don't think I could afford to live there these days. It's become somewhat exclusive. I guess this could also go in pro-revenge. Maybe I should have put it here first. I've used dollars here, because it's what most people reading this will relate to. This doesn't take place in the US, and I've given an approximate dollar value for local currency. This is going to be very long. Background. 1,000,000 years ago, my property was part of a large farm. I bought it about 30 years ago, long after the farm was broken up, but before there was any development near it. The piece of land I got was near the back entrance that joined into a dirt road that ran past. The more expensive plots were near the tarred road in the front. I originally bought a large chunk of the land intending to do some farming, but that never happened. About 20 years ago, some of the owners got organised. We'll call them the organised owners, OO, and had the area designated as a municipal suburb. The municipality agreed to put in tarred roads, water and electricity if a certain percentage of the properties were developed. A construction company linked to the OO went around contacting the owners who had land, but no buildings offering to build houses for us at a very, very reasonable price, contingent on them getting a certain minimum amount of people signing up. While this was happening, one of the OO approached me and offered to buy half of my property. I agreed, and the money I got for the sale, which was about 4x what I'd paid for the entire chunk of land 10 years prior, combined with a small loan from the bank, gave me what I needed to pay for a house to be built, and it was a fairly large and nice house too. I stayed in the house for a few years, and my mom moved in with me. I had decided to subdivide the property again and build her a house next to mine. But unfortunately, an undiagnosed tumor took her before the house could even be started. Well, it was diagnosed, but too late to do anything. Soon after she died, we moved out of the house and started renting it out. About a few weeks before we moved out the OO, I'd sold the land to started talking about starting an HOA. I wasn't interested and left soon after. About 2 years later, the neighbour OO contacted me. There were 2 roads entering the area these days. The original tarred road that was near where the farmhouse had been and was entered from a fairly busy main road, and my dirt road back entrance, which was now a tarred entrance from a wide but not very busy municipal road. The HOA was trying to get the old farm road blocked off to improve security and decrease through traffic, and wanted the road next to my property to be the main and only entrance to the HOA community. And they were pressuring me to join. I said no, and I was adamant, and eventually they accepted that, but told me they wanted to have a sign near the road welcoming people to the neighbourhood, and the only practical place to put it was on the edge of my property. They also wanted to build a little guard hut and have a security guard permanently monitoring who went in and came out, and they wanted to build his shed on my property. We came to an agreement whereby they would mow the lawn and pay the equivalent of about $35 per month in exchange for the land they needed. I was very happy with this arrangement since the property was fairly large, and it didn't really cost them anything since they already had a full-time gardening service servicing the HOA. This all happened over a decade ago. They eventually got the other main road blocked off, and the HOA is paying for Rent-A-Cop to be permanently stationed close to my property, as well as mowing my lawn and paying me enough money for takeaways for the family each month. I'm occasionally contacted by members of the HOA to get me to sign up, but I'm really not interested. My property has been rented to the same tenant for all these years, and everything there is going well for me. Until about 3 years ago, when someone scared the crap out of my tenant's young daughter by making strange noises and shooting a gun close to her bedroom window 3 or 4 times over about a month. This scared my tenant, and I guessed it scared the HOA because they and my tenant contacted me with a proposal. I joined the HOA, and they give me exclusions from the HOA rules, including exclusions from paying the monthly fees, and in addition, they will build a wall around the entire HOA neighbourhood, including electric fencing and security cameras. They told me they had wanted to do this for a while but were unwilling to build the wall on property that was not in the HOA. I couldn't see the downside, and so agreed. The dishonest dealings. It took a little over a year to build the wall and get everything completed, which is quite fast. And then a month to the day after everything was done, my tenant got an HOA warning about his dogs barking. He told the HOA that while the property was in the HOA, it was exempt from the rules. The HOA told him that they had cancelled the exemptions and that he had 30 days to comply. He contacted me and I opened some mail I'd gotten from the HOA. I'd ignored it since I was supposed to be exempt from the rules and fees. Man, did I get a surprise. They had retroactively cancelled the exemptions and were claiming that I pay late fees going back over a year, that the easement agreement had been cancelled and that they were retroactively cancelling it a year back because the HOA contract allowed them to use small unused portions of HOA members' land for the common good for free, that I refund them the money they had paid for the easement over that period, that I owed them money for the garden service mowing the large lawn, and that I would be fined for each infraction my tenant failed to remedy. This started an expensive process involving lawyers and the court system that ended with a judge telling me that what the HOA had done was mostly legal. They had the right to revoke the exemptions, but that they had to give me 30 days' notice. As I was walking to my car, the neighbour OO, the one who bought half my land so many years ago, told me that I was stupid to have refused to join when the HOA started, as I could have been a founder member, whatever that means, and that next time I should be sure to understand the documents I sign before signing them. The malicious compliance. Neighbour OO was right, I should have read the contract better. Also, I was interested in what it meant to be a founding member. Spoiler, nothing. And so when I got home, I grabbed the HOA contract I'd signed, as well as all the other documentation they had provided me with, and started reading. I was determined to break every rule I could find a loophole to break. I didn't get past the first page, and then, while the street address of the property is used to identify it for all practical purposes, in the city records it has a unique property number that has to be used on legal records. When my mom moved in, I'd subdivided the remaining property but hadn't yet started building on it. And when I gave the HOA the easement all those years ago, it had been on the property I'd sliced off for my mom. And when the HOA set up the contract, they had simply used the property number from the easement. The next afternoon, the neighbour OO delivered, and had me sign for, 2 documents. One telling me that my exemptions would expire in 30 days, and one letting me know that the easement would no longer be required after 30 days. I think he was being a bit malicious here, because I lived about an hour away from the property and he drove out himself. The revenge. Exactly 30 days to the hour. After the HOA had given me the 30 days notice, I knocked on the neighbour OO's door, did I mention he was the president of the HOA, and had him sign for 2 documents. The first was that I planned to build a house on my HOA property, which confused him, and the second was notice that they had 30 days to remove from the property the guard shed, the parts of the electric boom that were on my property, as well as the sign. He tried to engage me, but I ignored him, climbed into my car, and drove off. Early the next morning, I got a call from the HOA lawyer who explained to me that their junk would be staying on my property since it was in an unused part of my land. I explained that I was building a house there, and that the land would not be unused anymore. I could hear the smirk as he told me that building a second house to be spiteful would not be accepted by the courts. I sure hope he could hear the smirk in my voice when I told him that the property in question did not have a house, and was, in fact, barely large enough for a house to be built and would not be large enough for any extraneous buildings. I then told him to go look up the property in question and call me back. I had sliced off just enough to be legal, which was just enough to build a small house. It took them just under 5 days to get back to me. Their lawyer told me that the terms of the easement meant that I could not cancel without their permission, so I emailed him a photo of the document they sent to me cancelling the easement. That afternoon, neighbour OO invited me to lunch, his treat, to discuss the problem. I said, "No thanks." He extended the offer again 2 days later, and again I said, no thanks. Others of the original OO contacted me to try to talk. Some sounded aggressive, some sounded sympathetic. I said no thanks to each of them. Eventually, the lawyer phoned and asked if we could come to some sort of arrangement. I asked what he had in mind, and he told me that he was prepared to discuss exclusions in exchange for access to my property, so I said, no thanks, and please don't call me again. About 9 days before their 30 days was up, I got a call from a different lawyer. He said he wanted to negotiate a surrender. His words, not mine. I agreed to meet him at his office the next day. I'd already had documents drawn up, and the meeting was as simple as me giving him the documents and him reading them over. My new easement offers included everything offered by the old easement offer. I changed the line mow the lawn to get the property to HOA standards and keep it there, since it was now in the HOA. Would cost them about $500 per month instead of $35. This amount would increase with inflation. The previous contract didn't include that bit. When cancelled, for whatever reason, the HOA would have to pay me a cancellation fee of around $7,500. The contract automatically terminated 30 days after. Any disciplinary action was taken against me, my tenant, or the property. Any complaints were levied by the HOA against the property. Any legal action was taken against the property by anyone in the HOA. That lawyer who had offered to negotiate surrender would be allowed to mediate any disputes between us, at HOA's expense and that. The HOA would pay all my legal fees if any legal action was taken against me. I deliberately left some insane things in there so that I could appear to concede some points or be negotiated down when the HOA got indignant about the points I actually cared about. The lawyer didn't look happy. He said that my proposals sounded unfair, but that he'd have the HOA president look at them. I reminded him that in 8 days I'd be setting a group of men armed with sledgehammers and anger management issues loose on whatever of theirs was still on my property. That evening, I got an irate call from the HOA president. He told me he was never going to sign the new contract. I said, okay. He then told me I was charging too much per month and that it should be at the same rate as the previous contract. I pointed out that when I signed the previous contract, the area was under development, and there was at least one other road leading in and out, but that now there was only mine. And besides, mine was now developed with everything they needed. He told me that I was forcing them to sign a document they didn't want to sign. I told him that he was free to not sign it. He whined about everything he could think of, and then, eventually, told me I'd be hearing from his lawyer. The next morning, Surrender Lawyer called to ask if I'd be willing to come to their offices to sign the contract. I agreed. When I got there that afternoon, I learned that Surrender Lawyer was not a lawyer, but a paralegal. He handed me the contract and asked me to sign it. He laughed when I told him I'd have to read through it first to make sure nothing was changed, and mumbled something that sounded like, "I'm sure you would." I read the contract. Nothing had been changed. Not a single thing. And the HOA president had signed it, with the surrender paralegal signing as witness. I looked at him and said, "Why did he sign this? It was stupid to sign it." And the paralegal looked at me and said, I started telling him that signing it would be a bad decision, but he told me I wasn't being paid to think or give legal advice and to shut up. So I shut up. I said, "Do you understand what he's signed here?" He looks at me and nods. He said, "I asked him if I should have one of the lawyers look at it before giving it to you, and he told me that we had already billed enough for this, and that he'd sign it and sue me after their easement was safe." This happened about 1.5 years ago. It took 6 months for the HOA to find out how screwed they were. They wanted to sue me, but their lawyers explained to them that there was no way to win. Even if the court sided with them, all they would get is the easement contract voided, and they did not think that the court would side with them. The lawyers were adamant about one thing. The HOA could not live with the HOA pays my legal fees if legal action was taken against me, since it didn't limit the people taking legal action against me to the HOA. As worded, the HOA would be forced to pay for my legal fees if anyone took legal action against me. They argued that the courts would probably not enforce that, since the context of the agreement was to do with the HOA, and I told them I was prepared to find out, since the HOA would definitely be the ones taking action against me if they challenged it. I eventually signed an addendum to the contract that said that the neighbor OO, HOA president, would personally pay all my legal fees unless he held no position at all in the HOA, and that the HOA would pay all legal fees if the HOA took legal action against me. He resigned from the HOA at the end of that meeting. I politely told him in front of everyone that he should not sign documents unless he understands what he's signing. He didn't look pleased. It came out during the mediation, you cannot imagine how happy the lawyers were that their paralegal was mediating, that without the ability to control access to the HOA neighbourhood through the security boom, partially, on my property, the HOA had become a gated community a number of years back. The HOA would be in breach of their own articles and would be dissolved. I also learned, should have been obvious to me, that all the security cameras were wired and all terminate in the guardhouse guard shed. So basically, it was my way or the end of the HOA. That first mediation was really quite funny. My paralegal looked more than a little glum as we assembled, and he called everyone to order. I suspected that he had been told to work against me, so I took the initiative. I reminded everyone there that I had agreed to let paralegal mediate, but that I had agreed to no arbitration at all. If I didn't feel like the proceedings were fair, I'd leave, and they could go ahead and sue. Paralegal brightened up, and things actually went quite well. I'm writing this after getting home from the latest mediation. I built a paddling pool for the neighbourhood dogs, as in, I made it myself. I dug a hole, packed it with stone, and added a concrete finish. It was my first attempt, and if I say so myself, it looked, well, terrible. The HOA called for a mediation meeting. What they do now instead of taking official action. I've declined their mediation requests in the past, in which they told me, as nicely as they could, that the paddling pool was an eyesore right at the entrance of the HOA. I asked them to create a list of what needed to be fixed and how it needed to be fixed to give to me at the next meeting. The list was extensive. It basically required the pool to be rebuilt from scratch. I asked them if there was any way to reduce costs on the work they needed to get it up to HOA standards, and they assured me there was not. I thanked them, pulled out a copy of the agreement where they had agreed to get the property to HOA standards, which I'd highlighted, and handed it to them with the list. I told them the HOA usually preferred if these things were dealt with within 30 days. They started arguing until the mediator reminded them that they could not force me to comply without causing the easement to end. I should mention that their lawyers usually no longer attend these things. They said they would get it done. I also learned a lot about neighbor OO today. I found out that neighbor OO sold his property about 3 months back and is apparently leaving the country for Australia. I found out that the HOA had successfully sued him for a carload of money they had lost to his mismanagement as part of his vendetta against me. I also learned that he had a vendetta against me. I have no idea what I did to upset him. I'm not sure if I will screw with the HOA anymore. I already think I'm so close to breaking them, the only thing stopping them from cancelling the contract is the massive financial loss if they do. I guess a lot depends on how they treat me and my tenants going forward. Also, I do like the monthly payments though, so I'm motivated to play nice. TL, Dicta, HOA. President gets me to join the HOA under false pretenses that get upheld in court, then finds out that he's signed up, literally, the wrong property and has to resign after getting the HOA into an incredibly expensive situation that it cannot get out of. Thank you, everyone. When I posted this on malicious compliance, it was because I felt like I could fly and wanted to share. Now the adrenaline is gone, and I feel like I've been kicked by a donkey. I thought some people would like the story, but also thought it was too long for most. It seems I may have been very wrong. There are so many people commenting and sending messages that I cannot keep up. Thank you all so very much. OP inflicted a heavy revenge on the HOA. One mistake of the HOA that is mistakenly signing the wrong property led them to be under the strict terms, which the HOA had no choice but to accept, and it financially crippled the HOA, and its president had to resign. The revenge was impressive. Such a fraudulent HOA deserved the same treatment. The next story is from As an Atheist Films. Try to stiff me? Get a mechanic's lien. Hello, per pro revenge. I will be using fake names for this story that happened to me about 7 years ago. The job. I was starting my side business doing IT work for businesses and had some successful jobs for a few companies. I found word of mouth was the best way to gain new clients because entrepreneurs tend to network with other business owners. Tony was one such client who had heard I had done some work for a client and called to see if I could help. His company's needs were to stop using a semi-accounting service that they had been paying a percentage of their profit to process payments, purchase orders, and billings/receivables. He brought in an accountant to work a new product, pretty well known. They wanted a server to be accessible remotely and had already paid their ISP for a static IP for the server, but needed the actual server, redundancy UPS, and firewall device. I explained that for the product they had, we could probably set up a workstation and not a server, and it would run approximately $3,500 total and would be easy. But no, the owner wanted a full-blown server system with all the bells and whistles. He explained that he would likely be using the server for a CRM and a few other systems later on. The setup. Overall, the entire cost for the system would be $8,000, not including a few other services that needed annual billing, VPN, remote service. Equipment cost was $7,500. My labor charge was $500. UPS was $1,500. Server was $3,800, and refurbed firewall, Cisco ASA, with programming by a third-party specialist was $1,800, and a spare rack was $400. I got my contract signed, put an order with my distributor, I have Net45 set up with them, and the firewall specialist, and got to work 1.5 weeks later when the firewall came in last. I finished the job on a single weekend and got everything up and going after a call to the ISP, whom did not like the firewall appliance I installed. For some reason, they had to tweak things on their end and finally allowed the traffic to go through once more. I confirmed function with the owner, whom verbally approved and was happy. The AH move. I sent my invoice promptly on Monday. Left it as in, they had 1 week to pay. When I saw no reply or payment, after 4 days, I messaged Tony and asked if they had received my invoice. To my surprise, he replied the server was not working and proceeded to call me and tell me that the whole thing was a total waste of money and I should have never done the job. I, of course, apologized and informed him I would be on the way to fix whatever the problem was. When I got there, they refused to let me in to see the server, claiming they had someone coming over to fix my mishaps. At that point, I informed them they still needed to pay for the equipment, and we could maybe discuss my labor after I figure out what's going on. Tony refused to let me in, and was pretty upset. The advice. At this time, I was pretty upset. 2.5 weeks had passed since I ordered my equipment and my distributor was needing to get paid within 45 days. I was getting very nervous and was thinking of taking it to small claims court until, talking with a friend, he informed me I could pull a mechanic's lien. I informed him this was for IT, and he stated that mechanic's lien where I live can actually be pulled on various industries, and IT was one of them. So I started the process to fill out and file a mechanic's lien on Tony's company. Much to my surprise, there was no court date. All I needed to do was provide considerable proof to clerks, and later to the constable. The revenge. After filling out the mechanic's lien and serving him notice, I once again gave him the opportunity to pay the $8,000 owed. By this time, I had spoken with my distributor and he switched my account from Net45 to Net90. He refused via phone call and got him on text. I took the information I had and went to the local constables, whom, after seeing the mechanic's lien and proof, set up an appointment to meet me at the place of business to take back my server, UPS, and firewall. I went in on Tuesday, which I had learned was the day the accountant came in to start the week 0. Constable and I arrived at 7:30 a.m. right on opening time. At first, they refused entry until Tony came by and was informed I was enforcing my mechanics lien and would be taking back my equipment. He immediately got riled up and claimed I could not take the equipment because a new person had replaced it all. The constable asked if I had serial numbers and models for the equipment, which I did. We go in and find my server, UPS, and firewall all in the exact same way I left it. The server showed it had been online for the entire time. No real changes were noticed, and as far as I could tell, no one had worked on it. Tony began to chuckle when I shut the server down and says, "How are you going to take the system when it's bolted to the ground? Bet you didn't think about that, did you?" He did not realize that rack-mounted equipment is not permanently attached to the mount. I guess he thought he had me beat because it was all one system that you cannot take apart, and not something that was put together. His jaw dropped the moment I removed the server, loaded it onto the cart after removing a couple of bolts. He started panicking and started telling the constable that he would sue him if he didn't stop me. The constable simply stayed calm and ignored the owner. I guess after a bit he informed Tony that he needed to get out of his face and step back. But when Tony refused to back down, the constable undid his holster's safety harness and put his hand on his firearm. Tony's face was exquisite, full of fear, and eventually a dawning sensation that this was going to happen one way or another. At first, I did not understand why he was so riled up and now had a panicked face like his world just collapsed until a bit later. I wrapped up my server, UPS, firewall, and left the rack. True to Tony's word, undoing the bolts proved difficult to impossible with the tools I had, so I told Tony he could keep IT for the new server he tries to set up. It didn't take more than 2 hours before I got a call from him stating that he had talked to his attorney and he would be suing me for damages and I would be going to jail for trespassing. I informed him he did not pay for the equipment. His equipment was repoed, thus there was nothing to sue for. As far as trespassing, I was servicing a mechanics lien with a law enforcement officer. Thus, it is not trespassing. He then starts hemming and hawing about how he needs to bill clients because he hasn't had revenue in a week, but his accountant can't do anything because she has no access to the accounting software and they have no copies. I informed him it was not my problem. I would not be giving access to the server nor data contained, and he should have paid for the equipment instead of trying to screw me over for $8,000. He then offered to pay me if I could install the server back the same day, but that only if I did it that same day, otherwise he'd find someone else. I informed him that our original contract was null and void. I would be returning the equipment to my distributor, but first I had to wipe the storage by DoD standards, which means 0% chance of recovering files, unless he somehow had NSA-level funds. He starts freaking out and resorts back to what he usually did. Threatens me to lawsuit, make my life a living hell, etc. So I hang up and text him I am going to proceed to delete his data that evening and that I was no longer interested in working with him. More advice and the real revenge. He called me at least 50 times. I just silenced my phone and had a talk to my friend later that night. The friend whom had given me the advice. He then tells me why I was returning the equipment. If I had the only copy that has everything from client names, contacts, phone numbers, billings, receivables, etc. He asked me how much revenue did the company generate. I informed him I was taking a wild guess, but it was somewhere in the ballpark of $58,078 at $21 for the last month. He laughs and tells me, why don't you charge them double the price to get his equipment back and have him pay you cash before you start? He was right. I was taking my petty revenge and walking out with $1,800 in a firewall I had to pay in advance and a $500 unpaid labor charge. Why not take it a step further, get sweeter revenge, and get paid a fat stack of money? The following day, I messaged Tony. I apologize for the way I behaved yesterday. It was not professional. Unfortunately, your short attitude and attempts to screw me over got the better of me. The server has not been wiped yet. I would like to reconsider a new arrangement so we can salvage this sour experience and turn it into sweet honey. Are you interested in working with me to get your equipment back? I must warn you, It will be extra since I would be doing double the work? Let me know. Tony immediately called me, and immediately his ways came up. I knew you would change your mind and come crawling back. Yes, I want everything back, but I am only paying $50 and not a dime more. The $50 is me being generous to give you a second chance to do things right. I immediately informed him that I still have all the equipment, and in fact, it would only take maybe 20 minutes to complete the job. However, I had a different idea in terms of the price. The new price was $15,000 to be paid cash. He immediately starts yelling and hollering. I keep talking and inform him he has 2 weeks to decide if being able to get paid by his clients was worth it. If not, the equipment was going back, and that would be that. No hard feelings. I hang up. About 2 days later, I get a call from Tony informing me he agreed to new arrangement to please set it up and install it ASAP. I tell him I can go Friday, but I would need to be paid $15,000 cash before I even unload a single bolt from my vehicle. He agreed. I could hear a lady talking, tell him he needs to get this resolved because they had not had revenue in nearly 2 weeks. This was on Wednesday. On Thursday, I get a call from his daughter, whom is apparently the accountant and the lady whom was telling him to resolve it. She is cutting a check and needs to know my name. I inform her I would not be accepting checks, and I had told Tony specifically it would be in cash. She says okay and tells me if the amount of $12,000 was correct. I once again correct her and inform her the correct amount was $15,000 cash. She said in satire, "Of course it's $15,000. I will go make the withdrawal and have the money ready tomorrow." Sure enough, Friday morning, true to her words, she and Tony were there with $15,000 cash. I counted it in front of her and Tony. She makes a comment saying that I was a lifesaver because they could not go back to the service they used before to get paid, and they urgently needed to get some POs sent out. I placed it in my vehicle, locked the glove box, and unloaded the equipment. True to my word, it took me 20 minutes to place the server, firewall, and UPS inside the rack mount. Connect the cables, power on the server, and ask them to test it out when they get a chance. If anything was wrong, to not contact me and to have a good day. I actually had tested it out already before I left their server room. Despite my pettiness at times, I am still a professional. The revenge was really exemplary, a smart and calculated win. The best move was to hold client's vital data hostage and to make him pay $15,000. The revenge was perfectly executed and satisfying. Let's start with a very interesting story from Metal Dude. Horrible boss blocks my promotion and other job prospects, so I go Liam Neeson on his ass. Best revenge I've ever had. Edit and important update. Almost 6 months after I made this post, and I just found out Stalin now knows I did this to him. A former colleague came to my bar last night and told me this thread on Reddit was seen and read by someone at my old office. The news was out, and soon people started putting the dots together. I don't know who informed Stalin about this, but apparently he knows. I haven't heard anything from him or Knife Girl because, seeing she still works at the same office, I'm pretty sure she now knows I spilled the beans on her as well. To be honest, I thought I'd be horrified if people found out, but I actually feel excited. TLDR in the end, because it really is a long story. Not everybody's going to want to read the whole thing. Dutch, Flemish, and French are my first and second languages, so please try and look past any grammar or vocabulary mistakes. This is a bit of a long story, but I really wanted to sketch an image of what kind of a person this boss really was, so you would understand why I sunk so low as to seek my revenge in such a brutal way. I was desperate, and he had it coming. I stumbled upon the revenge stories here on Reddit about 2 weeks ago, and it dawned on me. I have an excellent revenge story myself. Why not share it with you guys? This happened a few years ago, and because I recently left the company, I feel it's safe to share this story here. I, Metal Dude, then 35M, was working in a major wholesale company in Belgium. I was second in command at a large branch of this company. The branch manager, then 40M, was a complete asshole. Let's call him Stalin from now on. He also responds well to Antichrist or Satan, but let's keep it at Stalin. Other characters in this story are my girlfriend, then 27F, Stalin's wife, Cinderella, then 30 plus F, the big boss of the entire company, Big Boss, then 60 plus M, and one of the heads of a department at our branch, then 28F. Let's call her Knife Girl. I was working for this company for quite a while at this point in time. I always got along with my direct superiors and was now second in command, well on my way to become branch manager myself one day. But then, out of the blue, my old manager got promoted to headquarters and was replaced by a new manager. Introducing Stalin. The guy was a few years older than me and introduced himself to the team as someone who gets things done, and that we would grow into the most successful branch of the company under his wings. He also didn't like the word can't, claiming to be deaf to that word. He was a winner and only surrounds himself with other winners. Roll eyes. Everyone immediately knew we had a character on our hands. From week one, it was clear to everyone that Stalin didn't know the first thing about the company and what we were selling, and he did not know anything about leading a team and working with people. He always knew everything better than others and had the annoying tendency to let other people do most of his work. So yeah, as second in command, I suddenly had a lot on my plate. I'm not going to bore you guys with the details, but my full-time job just became 2 full-time jobs because I had to do most of Stalin's work too, as in, here you go, and never expect a thank you or good job. So Stalin was a terrible boss. Surely things couldn't get any worse than this. Now could they? Spoiler alert, but yes, they could. One day I was working and I got a telephone call. The person on the other side of the line introduced himself as an important manager of our biggest competitor. For such an important manager, his French was really bad, so I already figured something was fishy. And why would a competitor call me and introduce himself as being an important person? Turns out this manager was offering me a job at their company if I was willing to share any company secrets of my current employer and maybe try and steal some customers away to the competitor's company. I didn't buy into this absurd conversation, but I remained friendly and respectfully declined his offer. 1 hour later, I get called into Stalin's office. He then confronted me with the phone call and told me he was testing me to see if I was loyal to the company and to him. He ended this baffling conversation with the words, "And I will continue to test you from time to time in the future." What? The guy prank called me himself to test my loyalty? While I was drowning in work because I had to do most of his work as well. And douche over here was spending his newly required free time by doing et like this. Who does this? This is the stuff you see in bad comedies, not in real life. Things got even worse in the weeks to come. Stalin began to do less and less of his work. There were times when I came into his office to ask for some help, only to find him reading the newspaper or even playing online poker. He didn't even try to hide it. After all, why should he? He was so superior, remember? When we didn't hit our mark and the results were not as good as anticipated, he would round everybody up and yell at us. He was expecting results from now on, and he wouldn't hesitate to fire people if they didn't have what it took, all the while without doing anything himself. To make things worse, he fired some people who were easily fired, new workers without a long-term contract, to set an example, and he didn't replace them to lower the costs. So now everybody was working 40 plus hours on a 35-hour contract, just to keep the branch up and running. Well, almost everybody. Knife Girl, the head of a small yet important department, stopped working at noon every single Friday. And Stalin himself sure didn't do 40 plus hours. Nah. Every Tuesday, he was gone by 2 p.m., his weekly Thai massage and relaxing spa. Every Thursday, he'd come in later and later. Turns out Wednesday evening was soccer training. He was the coach of a team in the lowest amateur division. So after training, he was busy drinking beer like there was no tomorrow. On top of this, every Friday afternoon, he was gone as well. He told us that he always went to headquarters in Brussels then, meetings with the board and the big boss. I recognise bull rap when I see it. My former managers never had to do this. Also very mysterious, but he's gone every Friday, just like Knife Girl. You already know where I'm heading with this, but that's for later. Some juicy stuff coming up. Stalin also got a lot of pleasure from calling certain people into his office and yelling at them in person, threatening them with their job if they didn't start working harder and more. He especially seemed to target the youngest and newest employees, and if possible, the females. I don't recall him ever treating more mature male co-workers like this. But we, as a team, made things work, and we hit our target a few months in a row. It helped that a local competitor went out of business, of course, but still, we did very well compared to the other branches in Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. So at the New Year's reception, a company tradition, all the major branch managers and second managers are there, Stalin got called on stage, where the big boss, the head of the entire company, handed him over an award, Manager of the Year. Instead of thanking his employees, this sack of turds started thanking the big boss for the faith he had given him, thanked his pregnant wife, and then he started complimenting himself. He was a good manager with a nose for good business, and he knows how to get the best out of people. Blah, blah, blah. I nearly vomited. It was disgusting to watch. And then the applause he received. This was his moment, and he wanted everybody to know. The next day, the trophy he received, a cheap piece of metal, was on an especially designed piece of furniture in the middle of his office. Honestly, Stalin reminded me a bit of Steve Carell of The Office at this point, but the evil version with an even bigger ego. A few weeks later, I was working late, again, and by sheer luck, I glanced over at the security camera, and I was in shock. I witnessed Stalin kissing with one of our heads of a department, more or less a third person in command, on the parking lot. Nave Girl and Stalin? She was a bit of an odd girl, a pretty girl, but I always had the feeling she didn't really have all of her marbles in place. She actually went to the same high school and university as my girlfriend, so the two know each other without being friends. Small world, this will be important later. So Knife Girl was dating Stalin. I thought she was smarter than this. And wait a minute. Didn't Stalin thank his wife during that terrible speech at New Year? His pregnant wife? Oh, what an asshole. He's cheating on his pregnant wife. Just when I thought this guy couldn't get any worse. Because I knew he was the worst of the worst. To show off his power to anyone, and especially me who he couldn't control or threaten in a face-to-face conversation, he had this annoying habit of controlling everyone's vacation days like a Roman emperor who's controlling the faith of the fallen gladiators. In his first year as a manager, I requested a vacation in October, somewhere in April, and he denied me that week, only to grant me the leave of absence 2 weeks before I was supposed to go on holiday. I was planning on going to Greece with my girlfriend and her family, but because I didn't get my holiday approved in time, my girlfriend's family decided to postpone and go another time. My girlfriend and her father didn't apply for a vacation because of this. Stalin didn't just screw me over, he screwed my in-laws and girlfriend over as well. He refused to give me that holiday, only to grant it to me afterwards to show me he's the boss. And it costs me my trip to Athens. He truly was a major douchebag. The guy's ego had gotten so large it deserved its own national flag by this point. I swear to God, if it got any bigger, astronauts would easily spot it from space, just like the Chinese wall. I hated that prick. The next year came, and because I witnessed him doing this to other employees and myself, I figured I needed a plan. I proceeded in requesting to have my holiday approved, and surprise, surprise, Stalin denied me my vacation again. He claimed he needed me at work that month because of an inventory, which is done by other people, not myself. But this time, I had a plan. He needed me because I did my job, and on top of that, I did most of his job as well. Everything he didn't like about his job, basically everything with numbers, accountancy, paperwork, etc., I had to do it. He couldn't afford to lose me. So I decided to try one of his own tricks on him. I called in and pretended I was the manager of another company. I told Stalin that I had received the resume of Metal Dude and was informing to know what kind of employee he is. I can do different accents and voices, so this was a piece of cake for me. The plan was for Stalin to know that I was looking for another job and that he could lose me, forcing him to do his job himself. Scary shit, so the plan was for him to give me my days off, just to please me. Stalin believed I was another manager because he put on his important person voice and started to thrash talk me as an employee. I was unreliable, always late for work, sloppy, forgot things that were important, etc. You get the picture. It wasn't pretty. In order to prevent me from getting another job, Captain A-hole over here decided to talk bad about me to potential new employers. What a dick. What a horrible waste of oxygen this guy was. But at least it gave him a scare because the next day, my request for a holiday got magically approved. He never confronted me applying for jobs elsewhere, though. Mission accomplished. I got to plan that trip to Greece with my girlfriend and her family. They are Greek Belgians. I was finally going. Fun fact, but no, I wasn't going. After I booked and paid for everything, he came back on his word. 1 month before I was supposed to go on a holiday, he called me into his office and told me he had to go on an important business meeting in Prague, Czech Republic, and because one of us two had to be at work, he had no choice but to cancel my holiday. I was speechless for a moment but started thinking really quick, so I demanded that he put this on paper because my girlfriend would not be amused. He laughed, agreed, and sent me an email confirming my holiday got cancelled because he had to go to Prague. Little did he know I was building a case against him and I needed this on paper. The moron actually believed it was just to show my girlfriend I had no choice but to cancel our plans. Now, if this were true, then yeah, I would understand. But I knew he was lying. I just knew it. But I couldn't prove a thing. I had enough, though. I really had enough. Working for this man was impossible, and he was standing in my way. I had heard through the grapevine that he had blocked my internal promotions. See, I know a lot of people at headquarters, and someone had told me how he branded me as incompetent for seeking a better paid, higher up job within the company. He wanted me where I was at that moment, as a second in command who would do all of his work. This meant he was blocking my promotions and was preventing me from getting a nice job elsewhere. I heard firsthand how he down-talked my abilities. Sure, I have flaws as everybody else, but I'm not the screw-up he painted me to be to potential employers. I needed to find a new job, but Mr. Stalin over here was blocking every good opportunity. As long as he was in charge of the branch, I was basically his serf, bound to the company and bound to him as my lord. I needed a way out, but didn't know how to do it. But then Lady Luck walked into the room. The week I was supposed to go to Greece, Stalin went on his business trip, or so he told me. My girlfriend went to Athens with her family and saw something on Facebook. She called me and told me to open my WhatsApp. Girlfriend had sent me some screenshots from her Facebook. Turns out Naive Girl was posting pictures of her with Stalin in Switzerland. He went skiing with her. There was no business trip. That absolute disgrace of a human being had cancelled my holiday for the second year in a row so he could cheat on his wife with a younger woman. Ow, how I hated this dude. He did not expect my girlfriend and myself to see these pictures, though. Little did he know that girlfriend and Knife Girl knew each other and were Facebook friends. No contact in real life whatsoever, so Stalin really had no idea. It gave me the fuel I needed. I had proof he was cheating on his wife. Not just that. You see? Now, here's where things got really interesting. Only 2 weeks before this, I was networking at a company after drink, and I started talking to the manager of another branch, a direct equal to Stalin. I already had a few drinks, so I was a bit loose, and therefore did little to hide the fact that I disliked Stalin. And what do you know? That other manager didn't like Stalin either. Turned out Stalin only got his job because his wife is the daughter of the owner, Big Boss. This explained everything. The guy was so unqualified for the job. He only got the job because daddy-in-law threw him a bone. So not only was he cheating on his wife, He was cheating on the big boss's pregnant daughter. Oh, snap! Can I get a hallelujah? The universe was smiling upon me at last, and now I had proof. Pictures of him kissing another woman. Time to set things in motion. So my girlfriend was in Athens without me, and Stalin was in Switzerland getting laid. I was stuck at work, and things were difficult because we were understaffed. I decided to send an email to all branch managers, plus the big boss who never responds, asking for extra help, and that I couldn't ask my manager because he is on a business trip and asked not to be disturbed. I knew he told the big boss he was on a holiday because he had to hand in a request to get that holiday. So him being on a business trip made no sense, and I knew that. I wanted Big Boss to know that Stalin told us a lie. I didn't have a direct line to the big boss. Heck, I only talked to the guy 2 to 3 times during my time at the company. So I needed to draw his attention in a sneaky way. This email caught his attention all right. The big boss immediately replied to me, telling me Stalin is on a holiday and that he will inform him that the request for backup was granted. I made subtle contact with the big boss. Now I had an email conversation going. Me: no, he told us he's on a business trip. That's why he cancelled my holiday. Big boss: he's visiting an old school friend in Switzerland. I will get you some extra workforce myself. Me: here's the email in which he cancelled my holiday. I forward Big Boss the email Stalin sent me at my request. He clearly wrote he had to go on a business trip. Big Boss: I will talk to him about this. That's odd. Maybe he wasn't paying attention. I will call him this afternoon and sort this out. Thank you, and keep up the good work. The day after, Stalin calls me from Switzerland. Big Boss did call him, and this took Stalin by surprise. And Stalin doesn't like surprises. Little did he know this was just the beginning. I was prepared and decided to record the phone call. He went berserk on the phone, a little paraphrasing, "You are nothing. I can squash you like a fly. If I decide to take your holiday, there's nothing you can do about it. You're going to sit there like a little girl and take it all like the bunso that you are." Yes, he was very female-friendly. The big boss doesn't need to know I told you I was on a business trip. I don't owe anyone an explanation. You leave that senile old fart out of this. You hear me? At that moment, a light shined down on me from the heavens. I got him. It was just one sentence, but it was pure gold. Senile old fart. I bet rich daddy-in-law will have a field day with this one. I wanted more proof. I was like frickin' Sherlock or Columbo at this point. If he was having an affair, maybe those pictures wouldn't do. He could claim those were old pictures or something. I don't know. Didn't want to take the chance he'd talk his way out of it, so I needed more proof. Where was he going every Friday afternoon? Surely he was meeting Knife Girl somewhere. I needed to know where. Then a light bulb started glowing above my head. His emails. He once gave me his password to the company email address so I could access his work emails. Because this way I could do more of his work, you know. His password was the name of his favourite Belgian soccer team, Anderlecht. It's actually the biggest rival of my team. You can't make this stuff up. The guy was my antagonist in everything he touched. Would this password work on his personal email address as well? Surely he can't be that big of an idiot. But he was, of course. Mr. Idiot had the exact same password for everything. I found out he was on Tinder. I found out he was emailing with a chick from the Philippines. He must have met her there. And I found all the emails he sent with Knave Girl. Apparently it started way in the beginning, so they'd been seeing each other even before he got his Cinderella pregnant. Gotcha, motherfucker. As the Mission Impossible tune started playing, I began to unfold my plan. Stalin was now back from his little trip and acted like nothing happened. I could still access his email, so I checked every few days or so. On Wednesday, I struck gold again. He received an email confirmation of a visit to the spa wellness for 2 people at 3 p.m. and a confirmation of a visit to a certain restaurant at 6 p.m., also for 2 people. Both were for Friday. I wonder who he was going with. Checkmate mofo. Gotcha again. The timing was right for the next and final phase of my execution plan. I had printed out the pictures from Knife Girl's Facebook. Stalin kissing with Knife Girl, them skiing, them having drinks together, and Stalin in front of the Swiss flag in front of a cabin. Classic stuff. He was such a grateful model. I had put these pictures in an envelope and put a little note in it. It said something along the lines of, "Hey, we don't know each other, but I felt you needed to see this and know that your husband is having an affair. He did not go to Switzerland to visit some old school friend. No, he went there with this chick. Her name is Knave Girl. This is her address, this is her email, and this is her Facebook and phone number. She isn't a bad person. I don't even know if she knows he is married and has a kid." He told his boss he was in Switzerland to visit an old friend and told his co-workers he was on a business trip in Prague. Both are lies. He is having an affair with a girl from his work. I have hacked your husband's email and found some interesting stuff. You can read it for yourself. His password is Anderlecht. Please take your time in reading these emails and check the last mails he received. They're meeting up at Name Restaurant at 6 p.m. today. Before this, they are going to the spa resort at 3 p.m. I am sorry to throw this in your face. I know it's a lot, but you deserve better than this scum Big. Signed, Anonymous. I had some reservations as to include this poor girl, Cinderella, into my revenge. I was about to destroy her world too, and she didn't deserve this. But my girlfriend convinced me. She said, "If it were you and you were cheating on my pregnant ass, I'd want to know sooner rather than later. She needs to know, Metal Dude." Obviously, my girlfriend didn't call me Metal Dude. That'd be weird, but you understand, right? That particular Friday, I called work to say I'd be a little later that day because I had car problems. First time I was late in years. Instead, I drove to Stalin's and Cinderella's place and dropped the envelope in their front door mailbox and rang the doorbell, after which I quickly went away. I knew Cinderella was home alone. Her car was in the driveway and she was still home with a newborn. Stalin was at work. I then went to work where I sent an email to the big boss. I told the big boss that Stalin was skipping work a lot and that it was too much for my team and myself to keep dealing with this. I told the big boss that I was going to resign because of this. I ended the email with the following. And I included a voice recording you'd find very interesting to hear for yourself. It's Stalin calling me, right after you called him in Switzerland. It only took like 15 minutes and my phone rang. It was Big Boss himself, calling me on my company phone. Oh, even better than I hoped for. Big Boss told me he was amazed by how Stalin talked to me and about him and thanked me for sending this to him. He told me he would talk to Stalin about this and asked me to wait with my resignation for the time being. He would straighten things out. Me. He'll just deny everything, and as soon as you end the phone conversation with him, he'll project his anger on me. Big Boss, no, I'm visiting my daughter and grandson this afternoon, and I'll swing by at work before that. It's not that far apart. Ding, ding, ding. Did he just say he was visiting his daughter? The daughter I just nuked to smatterings with the news of her husband cheating on her? The same husband Big Boss wants to talk with before visiting his daughter? Maybe I should play the national lottery this afternoon because everything felt like it was going my way. I decided to keep my mouth shut about the cheating, well duh, but also about him being absent this afternoon. I was originally planning on complaining to the Big Boss that Stalin was never in on a Friday afternoon, luring the Big Boss to that restaurant at 6 p.m. But this was even better. No, let the Big Boss come in and see for himself that Stalin just wasn't there. 12 a.m. Knave Girl said, "Bye-bye to everyone," and off she went. 12:15 a.m. Stalin shut down his computer and left the office as well. Without saying goodbye, of course. Emperors don't talk to the peasants and plebs. 16 a.m. The Big Boss entered the building. It was showtime, bitches. Big Boss was clearly and visibly upset with something. Could it be his daughter showed him some naughty pictures already? Did he visit her first? He asked me where Stalin was, and I swear to God, Leonardo DiCaprio should hand me over his Oscar immediately. I acted all surprised and said, "Oh? You were coming here to talk to Stalin?" I must have misunderstood at the phone. Why didn't you talk to him in Brussels? At headquarters? He's there every Friday, no? The big boss looked surprised. I deserve that, Oscar. I really, really do. And went like, what do you mean? Me. He always leaves at noon, every Friday, because he's meeting you every week in Brussels. Or at least, that's what he told us. I could see the dominoes inside Big Boss's head start falling as Big Boss's face went blank. He took his phone and called someone. He took a few steps back, but I overheard some parts of the conversation. I think he was calling his daughter because he said, "No, he's not here. Apparently he went somewhere." I can only imagine his daughter telling him about the emails and the information I gave her about the restaurant and spa resort. Looked like she hadn't told him that part yet. Big boss. Oh, really? I know that place. Okay, I'll come over. Big boss then thanked me and said he'd take care of this and ended it with his classical "keep up the good work" as he left the room. I was full of questions that entire weekend. What had happened? All I know is that when I came in at work that Monday morning, Stalin was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there was some guy from headquarters telling us Stalin won't be in that week and that he'd be replacing him temporarily. After a month or so, they appointed a manager. Years later, I was working in Brussels at headquarters. I got that promotion. And I befriended a member of the board. During a business meal, we started talking, and when I mentioned I used to be second in command under Stalin, the guy started laughing. That guy? He said, "Man, let me tell you a story." The board member then filled in all the blanks I had for all of these years, not knowing I was the one who talked Stalin into the gallows, of course. Apparently, Stalin really did get the manager job because of his relationship with the big boss, being son-in-law. He was the golden kid, and Big Boss had big plans for Stalin. He was supposed to take over the company when Big Boss retired. But it turned out he was cheating on Big Boss's daughter with a few women and was also stealing time from the company by not being at work when he was supposed to be there. All stuff I already knew, of course. But hey, I was still an A-list Hollywood actor, so I acted all surprised and shit. Apparently, Big Boss and his daughter Cinderella walked in on him when he was in a restaurant with one of his mistresses. How I wanted to be a fly on the wall when that went down. I'd give my left testicle to see this whole event unfolding before my eyes. He then told me Cinderella divorced him, threw him out of the house, and Big Boss didn't fire him. They were afraid of legal implications, but instead demoted him to a meaningless position in the southern part of Belgium where people speak French. Stalin did not speak French. He only spoke West Flemish, which is like the hardest Dutch dialect known to man, so most native Dutch speakers, especially those from the Netherlands, didn't understand him either. Seriously, love people from West Flanders, but they speak a different language than other mortals out there. Klingon is easier to understand. Needless to say, Stalin was lost over there. He did not fit in, had no friends, no connections, no more power, and on top of it all, he did not understand the language. He quit the company after a few months and was now working in a low-wage job. As for Naive Girl, she walked away unharmed. We never talked about it, though. She met someone else and even married the dude a year later. Girlfriend and myself were invited to the wedding. Big Boss retired a few years later and sold the company to a foreigner. He didn't have anyone to succeed him, but the millions he received did miracles to soften that. His daughter apparently went back to the guy she dated before Stalin. They were still a couple the last time I heard. I do not feel bad for Stalin, not one bit. I'm not the kind of person who enjoys other people's misery, nor am I a sociopath, but this guy really boiled my kidneys, if you know what I mean. I never met such a narcissist, self-centered asshole in my entire life, and he wanted to destroy my life and the lives of many other people. As far as I'm concerned, I stopped him before he could do any more damage and saved my own career in the process. His wife is better off without him. The company is better off without him. My colleagues are better off without him, and I am better off without him. TL, DR. Horrible boss keeps me from promotions and finding a better job. I explained why he was such a horrible boss. I found out he was cheating on his pregnant wife, who happened to be the big boss's daughter. I gathered as much evidence as I could, pictures from Facebook, hacked his email, recorded him talking shit about the big boss, etc., and exposed him as a cheater and fraud, without anybody knowing it was me who did that. He lost his marriage, house, and eventually also his job. The revenge is epic. Through clever tactics, OP exposes the boss's infidelity and deceit while maintaining anonymity. The fallout is deeply satisfying, leading to the boss losing his marriage, home, and job. The revenge reminds us that karma always hit.